You know, if you really want to understand the story of human civilization itself, we're talking empires, religions, even the global politics of today, so much of it begins and continues right in the Middle East. It's a region that has been shaping our world for literally thousands of years.
So let me just start with a question for you. Where did the absolute building blocks of our modern world, I mean, things like writing, cities, the whole idea of an empire, where did that all actually start? Well, the answer lies right here. Okay, so let's get into it. Our whole story really kicks off in Mesopotamia, in this area everyone knows as the Fertile Crescent. This is the spot where, thousands of years ago, having reliable water allowed people to stop wandering and start farming. And that right there is the beginning of what we call recorded history. And that brings us to our very first era, the dawn of civilization. And look, that's not just some catchy phrase. This region was, quite literally, the cradle for so many of the basic ideas that still define how we all live today. I mean, just stop and think about how huge these innovations were. The Sumerians weren't just building little villages. They built the first cities. They invented cuneiform, the very first system of writing, mostly to keep track of stuff like grain and trade. And to manage all these people living together, they came up with the first legal codes and the first real governments. You could say the DNA of our modern world was written right here. So once you have these incredible new tools for organizing society, what happens next? Well, that leads directly to the next massive transformation. We start moving away from these scattered city-states into the age of giant, conquering empires that wanted to unify the whole known world. And this timeline just shows you how long this imperial tradition went on. It wasn't a one-and-done thing. After the Sumerians, you get the Akkadians, then the Babylonians, then the Assyrians. For over 1,500 years, it's just one power after another dominating this place. All of them fighting to control that fertile land and the money-making trade routes. And then the scale gets even bigger. First up, the Persian Achaemenid Empire comes along and, with its genius for administration, unites the entire Middle East for the first time. Then, bam, Alexander the Great sweeps in and he brings Greek culture with him. And finally, the Roman Empire shows up, imposing centuries of relative peace, the famous Pax Romana. Each new empire just built another layer on top of the last. Okay, fast forward to the 7th century AD. The two superpowers of the day, the Byzantine and the Persian Sasanian empires, had basically fought each other to a standstill. They were exhausted, and this created a massive power vacuum, perfectly setting the stage for a totally new force that was about to change everything. And that new force was Islam, which gave birth to a brand new kind of political state, the Caliphate. After the Prophet Muhammad's death in 632, his successors launched a series of conquests with a speed and success that were just, well, astonishing. They created this huge new empire in what felt like the blink of an eye. Eventually, a new dynasty, the Abbasids, took over, and they moved the capital to a new city they built from the ground up, Baghdad. And for centuries, and this is no exaggeration, Baghdad was the intellectual, cultural, and scientific center of the entire planet. This period was the Islamic Golden Age. I mean, scholars in Baghdad's House of Wisdom didn't just save ancient Greek philosophy that was lost in Europe, they built on it. They invented algebra and algorithms, yeah, those things, and made incredible advances in medicine and astronomy. They even gave us classics like 1001 Nights. A lot of this knowledge would eventually make its way to Europe and help spark the Renaissance. But you know, golden ages don't last forever. After centuries of unity and incredible progress, the Islamic world suddenly found itself facing these devastating threats from the outside. The huge Abbasid Caliphate started to break apart. And then it got attacked from two different directions at once. So from the west, you had the Crusades. They set up a few small states, but in the end, they were pushed out. The far more catastrophic threat came from the east, the Mongols. In 1258, they just completely sacked Baghdad, burned its legendary libraries to the ground, and brought the Abbasid Caliphate to a brutal final end. So after all that chaos and destruction, how does the region possibly rebuild? Well, out of the ashes of that post-Mongol world, a new power began to rise up in Anatolia, what we now call Turkey, and they would go on to create the last great Islamic caliphate, the Ottomans. And the Ottoman rise to power was just methodical and spectacular. They got their start around 1300, but the defining moment was in 1453, when they captured Constantinople, which officially ended the Byzantine Empire. By 1517, they controlled the holy cities of Mecca and Medina, and by the middle of the 16th century, They were at the absolute height of their power.
For hundreds of years, the Ottoman Empire was this huge, multi-ethnic powerhouse. But by the 1800s, it was in a long, slow decline. It just couldn't keep up with the industrial and military revolutions that were transforming Europe, and it got this really dismissive nickname, the sick man of Europe.
The whole thing finally came crashing down in World War I. And this, right here, is the crucial moment that leads directly to the creation of the modern Middle East we know today, a place defined by new borders, often called lines in the sand.
And a key reason they're called lines in the sand is this document, the Sykes-Picot Agreement. It was basically a secret backroom deal between Britain and France to carve up the region for themselves. These new borders were drawn for European interests, and they often totally ignored the ethnic, tribal, and religious groups on the ground, creating a legacy of instability that we're still dealing with today. And that brings us to 1948, one of the most pivotal years in the region's entire modern history. The British mandate in Palestine ended, and the State of Israel was established. Neighboring Arab countries immediately invaded, kicking off the First Arab-Israeli War and setting in motion a conflict that is still at the center of so much today.
At the exact same time, another force was totally reshaping the region's destiny. The discovery of unbelievable amounts of oil completely changed the Middle East relationship with the rest of the world. It suddenly became this critical hub for the global economy. All of a sudden, what happened here mattered everywhere.
Okay, so decades of Cold War politics and conflicts followed. But then we get to the year 1979, and this year saw two absolutely seismic events that would completely reshape the Middle East for the rest of the century, and really right up to the present day. On one hand, you've got the Camp David Accords, where Egypt, a major Arab power, makes peace with Israel. This just fractured the old Arab unity against the state. But on the other hand, you have the Iranian Revolution, which established a radical Shia Islamic republic. This introduced a whole new ideology and kicked off a decades-long rivalry with the major Sunni powers, especially Saudi Arabia.
And all of that brings us into the whirlwind of the 21st century, a period of just intense instability and constant change. You have the U.S. invasion of Iraq, the incredible hope and then tragedy of the Arab Spring, the brutal rise and fall of ISIS, the ongoing Iran-Saudi proxy wars, and most recently, the Abraham Accords, which saw more Arab nations normalizing relations with Israel.
So we've just journeyed through thousands of years, from the world's very first cities all the way to modern geopolitics, and it all kind of boils down to this one core tension. A region with just immense potential, but one that is so deeply burdened by the weight of its own incredible history. And that leaves us with the final and most important question: what will its next chapter be?